in the previous exercise, when we updated our React application to use fetch to fetch the data from the server, we made an implicit assumption that everything will work perfectly. That is, the communication between our React application and the server will work perfectly, and the server is up and running and is serving up the data. But there is many a slip between the cup and the lip. So when your application is communicating with the server, a lot of things can go wrong along the way. The client may not be having access to the internet. The server may not be up and running. And so many errors could be encountered. Now, the previous implementation did not have a way of handling errors if they occur when you're communicating with the server. In this exercise, we're going to update our application to handle errors. Now, the remaining part of displaying the error messages and so on has already been set up in our application. So it's only a matter of handling errors within our action creators, where we issue the fetch request to the server. So that's where we will make modifications to handle the situation when we encounter errors while communicating with the server. To get started on this exercise, as I mentioned, the views are all well updated in order to handle when error messages are delivered there. So we have seen how error messages are handled and how they are rendered in the views. But we haven't updated the place where we are actually accessing the server. So here, for example, when we fetch the dishes, we were optimistically assuming that all the communication with the server is going to work perfectly. And so we never bothered about handling errors here. Now, how do we update this to handle errors? So this is where we will go into our code here, and then I will update this to handle errors. So when we encounter an error, the first thing that we will do here is to worry about handling errors. So when we receive a response from the server, this response could be a response that is sending back the data, or the response could be an error response from the server. So whatever be the case, we need to handle the problem here. So to handle the problem, we'll say, okay, if you receive the response correctly from the server, then what do? So we'll say if response.OK. So the OK property will tell you that the response from the server was OK, and so you can handle things appropriately. Then in that case, we'll just return the response. So when you return the response, what happens? This response then will become available to the next then. So if you know how promises work, so when this returns something, that will be delivered in as the incoming parameter to the next, then that has been chained into the set of promise handlers here. So then in here, the corresponding callback function should be able to handle that appropriately. So if the response is okay, I'm just going to pass it down here, and then we are done. Otherwise, see, the otherwise is where the problem is. If you encounter error, then what do? So in that case, then we'll say var error is new error. So we'll generate a new error object. So this is error object that can be generated in JavaScript. So we'll generate a new error object, and inside this error object, we can set up a message to be delivered. So we'll say error, and then we'll extract the status from the response. So the response status will contain the status code for the response. So the status code, like as you saw, 300, 400s, 500s, the response codes. 200 OK is fine, which means that it should have already been handled by that part. The other ones we will handle here, the error codes that we'll handle here. So we will take the response error code and then we'll join that together into a error message here. So we'll say response status text. So typically the status will contain the status code and the status text will contain any error message if the server sends back an error message. So that is what we will construct as an error object here. And then after we construct the error object, then we'll say error.response is response. And then we will throw the error here. So when you throw the error in a promise handling, we can then implement a catch at the bottom, which will catch the error and then handle the error appropriately. So that I will show you in a minute how we complete that. So if you receive a response from the server, then this is how you handle the response from the server. Now, there could be situations where the server doesn't even respond. So in that case, in a promise handler, you can also supply an error handler here. If you have learned about promises, you know how the promise handling should be implemented. So here we will implement an error handler here. In the error handler, we'll say var error message. We'll say new error. Typically, when an error is encountered when communicating with the server, that error.message will contain some information about what this error is related to. So I'm going to take that part and then generate a new error object, and then we will throw an error. So that's how we will handle errors. So the first part is a situation where you receive a response from the server, but the response could be an error response from the server. The second part would be a situation where you don't hear back anything from the server, so that's where you will have to handle the error appropriately. Now, when you encounter an error, what happens? When you throw an error, now in the handling of promises, an error will cause a rejected promise. So that we will catch using the dot catch of the promises. So inside the dot catch, you will receive the error. And this catch would be caused either because you throw an error here or you throw the error here. Now, in either case, we will have to handle the error appropriately. So then we'll say error and we'll dispatch now dishes failed with the error.message here. So that is how we will handle the error. We have already implemented the dishes failed here, the method here. So that will automatically take care of it. So this is where we will dispatch a dishes failed action with the error message included in there, and that when it is received by the dishes fail will then create this action type and then dispatch that, and then so that will ensure that your state is updated with the appropriate error message set there. So that's the update that we will do to fetch dishes to handle errors. Now, the same kind of update needs to be done for the comments and also the promos here. In both the cases, the way you handle the error is exactly the same. So all I need to do is just copy this code from the dishes. There is nothing specific about dishes in this code. So I can just copy that code and then go down into the fetch comments here and then simply paste that code in here. And then that'll take care of handling the errors for my fetch comments. And similarly, I need to paste the same thing also for my promotions there. And so when I paste that in the promotions, that will also handle errors that are encountered in the promotions. Now, in addition, we need to get hold of this catch. So copy this catch, and then we'll paste the catch into the fetch comments. So as you can see, I am pasting that into the fetch comments here. And similarly, in the fetch promos, I will paste that in here. And of course, after pasting this catch error, make sure to update this to comments failed. And similarly, this one should be updated to promos failed here. And that's about it. So your application should now be able to handle errors that are caused when you are unable to communicate with the server. Let's save the changes. Going to our browser, our application should work exactly the same as before, should not have any problems at all, and all the rest should work as we expected. However, this is now time for me to introduce an error. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go and then shut down the server and see what my application will do when my server is not running. That's an easy way to generate an error. Going to the terminal window or the command window where my JSON server is running, I'm going to stop my JSON server by typing Control-C. So now my JSON server is not running at all. So if React client tries to talk to the server, it will fail to communicate with the server. Now, let's see how my application will display the error messages. Going to the browser, you now see that my browser is displaying the error message as encountered here. So failed to fetch here. Both of these are displaying the error message as we expected here. Now, in both the cases, the failure is because my React application is not able to reach the server. So the error that you encounter here is caused in our code by this particular error handling part here. So where the error message is encountered here. Now, let's do one minor modification to this, and then we'll see how the error is going to be displayed. So now what I will do is I will restart my server, but instead of accessing my dishes from dishes, I'm going to access it at a wrong location. So I'm going to update this to dishes rather than dishes. Of course, obviously, I'm causing this mistake deliberately just to illustrate to you what will happen. So once I do that, let me go back and restart my server. So let me restart my JSON server here. So my server is up and running. So my application should work perfectly fine in trying to reach the server. But then when it tries to access localhost :3001/dishes, it is going to fail. And so let's see how the error message is displayed in that circumstance. Going to the browser, let me reload my application. And then when my application is reloaded, you see what the error message here says. It says error 404 not found. So you see I deliberately caused a 404 error message here. And then you will notice that when you go down here, you will notice this tried to do a get to localhost 3001 dishes, which obviously doesn't exist. So that's why it encountered a 404 not found. And then so the dishes failed was called here. And when the dishes failed is called, then look at the action here. So inside the action, you see the payload here. It says error 404 not found. So that's the error message that was delivered to my Redux store, and that is what was configured in the Redux store. So when I open the next state in dishes, you see E is loading false. The error message is that, and the dishes is an empty array. So that is one more illustration of how your application is able to catch the errors. With this, we complete this exercise. This is a good time for you to do a git commit with the message fetch handling errors. Now, make sure to go back and correct the dishes back to dishes in the actioncreator.js file. Otherwise, you will keep encountering this error again and again.